The war is bad. The peace is good. Life is beautiful, so let us stop the war in Ukraine and enjoy peace. At Ukraine's account, of course. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane on UATV channel, giving you the hard truth in easy terms directly from Ukraine. The key to ending this war in Ukraine is hidden somewhere in China. At least such an impression is involuntarily shaping when you look at the last diplomatic meetings of the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. 2 weeks ago, he was in Moscow. Now he's receiving French President Emmanuel Macron and the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. European politicians are trying to convince Beijing to put more pressure on the Kremlin and start working actively to end the war against Ukraine. For example, Macron spoke on the phone with US President Joe Biden before his trip to Asia. And the sources say that the leaders once again emphasized their common will to cooperate with China to end Russian aggression and establish stable and lasting peace in Europe. Well, no matter how appeasingly beautiful this political eloquence might sound like, it has little to do with reality. The reality is that China has not taken a single action towards real peace for over a year. Only 2 months ago, Xi Jinping made his first verbal statements for peace and friendship again. Sound only, no action involved. Well, there were no direct talks or negotiations or discussions between Ukraine and China since February 24th, 2022, despite the fact that our government has repeatedly pointed out Ukraine welcomes such negotiations and is open to them.
We discussed and I raised the topic, I encouraged President Xi to reach out to President Zelensky. I know from my phone calls that and President Zelensky asked for it publicly. So it was interesting to hear that President Xi reiterated his willingness to speak when conditions and time are right. I think this is a positive element.
Sure. The EU and China did not only talk about Ukraine, of course, they also talked about Russia. After all, China's position in the UN Security Council creates a massively negative responsibility for the country in terms of its statements regarding China's friendship with the aggressor country, whose president is an international criminal at large. Another important topic is the nuclear threat to the world due to the location of the Russian nuclear arsenal in Belarus. After the meeting with Xi Jinping and Putin, politicians of the world talked about the nuclear danger and that it is possible to spread nuclear weapons to other countries. But within a few days, Putin announced it anyway. Russian nuclear missiles will be located in Belarus. Of course, we cannot know whether these are the consequences of talking between closed doors or whether the head of the Kremlin decided to play yet another game on his own. This way or the other, China clearly puts it, the spread of nuclear weapons is not acceptable. Moreover, China condemned Russia's decision and called for the withdrawal of nuclear weapons from countries that are not nuclear states. Moreover, China's ambassador to EU, Mr. Fu Cun, said that Beijing does not recognize Crimea and Donbass as Russian territories and does not provide military assistance to Moscow. He called the statement about boundless friendship with Russia rhetoric.
I can say that there will not be and cannot be any placement of nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus until China gives Putin permission to place nuclear weapons there. Will China give Putin permission to place nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus? I am more than sure not. Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
However, as Politica puts it, politicians have so far failed to change Xi Jinping's position on the war in Ukraine. In particular, journalists drew attention to the fact that Xi limited himself to the usual protocol statements during the briefing with Macron. In particular, he repeated his thesis that all sides have reasonable security concerns. In addition, he did not respond in any way to Macron's public request to influence Moscow to achieve peace. Politico and the whole world also notices that, contrary to protocol, Macron spoke for about twice as long as the Chinese leader did during the press conference, and Xi's entourage did not like it, obviously. Those politicians are just sensitive as little children, aren't they sometimes? Nevertheless, the head of European diplomacy, Josep Borrell, will visit China already next week. We on UATV promise to keep you posted on that. While the European Union is trying to convince China not to provide weapons to Russia, which, according to various media, Beijing has not done yet, and I hope won't ever, some politicians in the EU are looking for a way to provide Ukraine with more ammunition. And they are having a hard time finding a consensus. Europe has found as much as €2 billion for Ukraine's rearmament and now is swamped into talks on the proper way to spend it. Should the money be used for purchases only within the EU? Or could it be spent in other countries as well? Germany says that the time is short and it is worth buying ammunition wherever there is an opportunity, while France is in favor of keeping the money within the European Union. Well, I will now speak for all of Ukraine. Dear politicians, maybe Germany is right after all. Maybe the time of talkings and negotiations is over. Maybe already just brace the fact the armed forces only are proper negotiators with Russia. Maybe just provide us with all the ammunition we use to protect our mutual European values. After all, haven't we seen enough evidence of the fact that counter-offensive is the only way to answer Russia for Bucha, Kharkiv, Kherson, Bakhmut or other Ukrainian cities where Russians were taking a bloodbath? You are asking yourselves if Ukraine should be getting those air defense systems, tanks, fighter jets. I have an answer. Welcome to the battlefield. Come over to Bakhmut and then suit yourself. Russian army, with all the military proxies, missiles, personnel, how much progress did Putin make during the past year? Some kilometers in some places using direct, deadly, inhuman, meat-grinding assaults? While Ukraine has recaptured the entire north of our country, Kharkiv Oblast, half of Kherson Oblast, and now we are preparing for a new counter-offensive and Russians are so nervous about it, digging trenches across all Crimea, erecting concrete barriers in the Belgorod Oblast. But we in Ukraine plan no attacks on Russian territory. We only want to get back what's ours. Maybe Ukrainians want too much. After all, Europeans and Americans today suffer the inflation, soaring petrol prices and other things of a sort. Well, while some countries experience economic losses indeed, which is sad to hear, we lose lives. We lose health, both physical and mental. A lot of our children will never be able to enjoy balloons, sweets and parties anymore, because they are dead, perished in a hellfire of Russia's instigated war. 8 million Ukrainians have fled homeland, without even being able to pack belongings, often without being able to return to native homes because there are no homes anymore. That background, all these conversations about where and how to buy them projectiles that can help us to stop all that and defeat the terrorist state of Russia is insulting. It is nonsense. And I'm not sorry for calling it nonsense, it's rubbish. Unless you, dear politicians, want Russia to defeat Ukraine and the Kremlin to regain control over the Eastern Europe. Russia is an outdated predatory empire that lives at the expense of capturing new territories, and it is not difficult to estimate how and when the Kremlin will decide to stop. It won't, ever. It just can't. It is predatory Soviet nature. Therefore, we in Ukraine are a bit envious of Baltic states and Poland, who currently are enjoying NATO membership in full, while at the same time we're being grateful to these countries for helping Ukraine to get as much aid as possible. Why? Why do they do it instead of just speaking about it? Because these countries know exactly, unlike you, dear European talking heads, what is it like to have Soviet Russia as a big brother.
Оборона і захист наших людей.
Defense and protection of our people, maintenance of our resilience, primarily the resilience of warriors is the number one issue at all negotiations and meetings. Exactly defense, weapons for Ukraine, ammunition for Ukraine, new defense system for Ukraine. And I thank Poland, I thank our partners for making this visit truly meaningful.
We're very grateful for the help that has already been provided to us and that is planned to be. For accepting Ukrainians into European communities, for the fact that EU countries are enduring economic difficulties indeed because of sanctions against Russia. However, mark my words, these are not losses, these are investments, and it will pay off multifold. While any negotiation with Russia is dangerous, it was not for nothing that German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck wrote in his memoirs that agreements with Russia are not worth the paper they're written on. This is why the war. This is why the military pressure. This is why the 11th package of sanctions, which I very much hope will hit Russia even harder. Let the Kremlin be bragging about how their economy can withstand like almost everything, but as the exchange rate of their ruble is clearly showing, they just can't. Please let me raise another question. Catholics will be celebrating Easter the day after tomorrow. Orthodox Christians will celebrate it in a week. Jews celebrated Passover yesterday, and in 2 weeks Muslims will celebrate the end of the holy month of Ramadan. And many Ukrainians will spend major religious holidays not with their families and relatives but in Russian captivity. Instead of great joy, enormous pain. The defenders are constantly psychologically pressured in captivity to switch sides and join Russia. They are persuaded in Russian way, of course. That is torture, intimidation, beatings. I don't know how many Ukrainians are currently held in Russian captivity. Russians will never say it. No humanitarian organizations are allowed to visit Ukrainians there. Neither the Red Cross nor other peacekeepers. The UN Human Rights Monitoring missions in Ukraine has already documented dozens of gross violations committed by Russian armed forces against Ukrainian prisoners of war, which may amount to war crimes. The thematic report of the mission is based on the testimony of Ukrainian POVs who were returned from captivity.
Conditions for many Ukrainian prisoners of war were shocking. Access to medical care was often insufficient or unavailable, sometimes leading to dire consequences. The report documents that 5 of them died in internment, reportedly due to the lack of medical attention. The number of documented cases of torture and ill treatment during internment in penitentiary facilities is shocking. More than 84% endured such mistreatment. Penitentiary staff subjected prisoners of war to so-called welcome beatings upon their arrival, beat and electrocuted them regularly during inspections in cells while walking them around the facilities. Members of the Russian Federal Penitentiary Services and those in charge of many places of internment in Russian occupied territory systematically engage in such practicals against POWs. Former POWs told our colleagues that they treated weekly trips to the shower which inevitably ended in beatings and humiliation, often with sexual overtones. Krzysztof Janowski, spokesperson for the UN Crisis Coordinator in Ukraine.
Torture. They use prisoners as human shields. And other forms of abuse are a common thing in Russia. The findings of the UN can and should be used as evidence in international criminal court trials. According to the mission, there were 15 confirmed executions of Ukrainian POVs during the 13th month of full-scale invasion. To mention alone is Alexander Matsievsky murder, a Ukrainian hero who was shot for the words "Glory to Ukraine." The tragedy in Olenivka, where dozens of Ukrainian prisoners died and representatives of the Red Cross were never allowed to the place. Ukraine continues to be a responsible member of the international community, adhering strictly to its obligations under international humanitarian law. Ukraine follows humane treatment rules for Russian POVs and ensures that they have every right guaranteed by international law. Ukraine allows representatives of specialized international organizations, including the International Committee of the Red Cross, access to Russian prisoners of war and demands that Russia do the same. Russia has not yet agreed to the release of all the seriously wounded and sick women and civilians, and I don't think it ever will. The aggressor is trying to use the Ukrainian prisoners as leverage of pressure on their relative society and the Ukrainian authorities, although, according to the Geneva Convention, severely wounded prisoners should be returned to their homeland if their health allows. And Ukraine did exactly that at the end of March. Why? It is simple to answer that. Because we're no Russians. It was Henry Keane on UATV, bringing hard facts in simple terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tune for more.